Welcome to Study Loop.
So for this question, the basic, the underlying answering this is answering the question, what is eutrophication? Um, and it's actually, this is going to sound a little strange, but I think that the etymology here kind of helps remember it a little bit. So trough sounds like something you're familiar with from this chapter, which is trophic levels. Um, so you know that might be related somehow to what trophic levels are. And actually, this root word means nutrients or nutrition or something to that effect. Nutrition. Um, which makes sense given like trophic levels are all about, the different levels of food consumption or energy consumption, but that also involves an intake of nutrients, and it's all about the nutrition at hand. Um, and this other this prefix actually means good or well. So this is well or good nutrition, which sounds positive, but in this case, it's better to understand it as maybe over nutrition. And why might that be a bad thing? Well, in this example here, we have sort of sorry, excuse me, there we go. Sorry. In this example, this is sort of a common way to understand this. We have here a lake. This is usually where eutrophication happens. And we have an influx of nutrients. And maybe this comes from fertilizer that was in the soil and has run off into the lake water. That's a really common way that eutrophication happens. So we get an excess of nutrients, like a lot more that weren't here before. And in this lake, we have microorganisms, and also there is also algae. If you're familiar with an algal bloom, that's an example of eutrophication. So in this example, we're going to say these are just random microorganisms that existed at like a stable population size, beforehand. But with this influx of nutrients, all of that energy that they get from this nutrition leads them to expand in population size like wild. Uh, but this is not sustainable because eventually these nutrients are going to run out, and also because these organisms are just going to die, like all organisms do. So as part of like the natural cycle of life, all of these organisms will die. And when they start to die off, they decompose. And in the process of decomposition, a lot of things oxidize. And what that means is they use up oxygen. And what that means is there is a limited amount of oxygen available in this lake. And when all of these microorganisms have used up the oxygen in their decomposition process, there is less oxygen available in the lake for all of the other organisms like the fish and the plants that are living here already. What that means is that all of the other organisms start to die off as well because they need oxygen to survive and live and breathe and also die and decompose. And so you basically get a lot of dead organisms. That's eutrophication. Again, the name seems a little more positive than what it actually is, but it starts from basically having too many nutrients for the system to maintain. Um, so now that we have that understanding down, let's take a look at our options here and figure out which ones make the most sense. Um, excuse me. We have option A is fixation. That is related to nitrogen fixation, um, which is probably not, that's a normal part of any ecosystem, not really involved in this stage. I mean, if nitrogen is, one of the nutrients at hand, or some of these nutrients that aren't nitrogen need to get fixated into the system, that's probably happening at this stage. But it's not the, primary cause of the excess, like what the excess nitrogen has the effect on is this part later on, not at the fixating level. So that's out. Same thing actually with option D, nitrification, because again, that's like sort of a natural part of the nitrogen cycle. And it's going to be happening, in some of these microorganisms, but it's not what the ultimate end goal that we're looking at here is. So A and D are out, and we're left with B, acid rain, and C, dead zones. Now, I think it's safe to say, based off of what we've just covered, that acid rain is probably not the option because, yes, some of this lake water is going to be taken up and evaporated and incorporated into rainwater, but there's nothing acidic about it at this point in time, unless somehow all of these dead organisms just really added some acid into the system. But that's not as common as this whole dead organism pile in the lake, which is really sad. And in fact, when we look at it, we have C, dead zones, is pretty much describing what this is. This is actually a dead zone. That is the official terminology for it, is like the aftermath of eutrophication. So even if, in this example, like I gave a general example with like normal flora and fauna. In the multiple choice option, you're given a hydraulic reservoir without normal flora and fauna, you're still going to see dead zones, even if it just means that the microorganisms themselves aren't going to be alive. So that is our option. That is our answer still. And, excuse me, we can leave it at that.